Sir, you need to get out of that seat right now. The sharp command echoed through the quiet first-class cabin so suddenly that every nearby conversation came to an immediate stop. A businessman slowly lowered the financial report he had been reading. A young couple paused in the middle of fastening their seat belts. An elderly woman looked over the top of her glasses with growing concern. Standing beside seat 3 Alpha was the lead flight attendant, her posture perfectly professional, her smile completely absent. Sitting calmly by the window was Jordan Whitmore, a 44-year-old black man dressed in a charcoal blazer, an open-collar white dress shirt, dark trousers, and polished brown leather shoes. A worn leather travel bag rested beneath the seat in front of him, and his boarding pass remained neatly folded inside his passport. Nothing about him suggested wealth, influence, or executive authority. He looked like any other traveler beginning another ordinary business trip. Jordan slowly raised his eyes and asked in a calm, respectful voice, "Has my reservation changed?" The lead flight attendant barely looked at the boarding pass in his hand before answering. "That seat is being reassigned. I need you to move immediately." Jordan remained seated. "May I ask why?" She glanced briefly toward the boarding door where a well-dressed white passenger stood waiting with an expensive suitcase and an expression that suggested the outcome had already been decided. "A premium customer requires this seat," she replied. Jordan looked back at her without changing his expression. "According to my ticket, I am the premium customer assigned to this seat." A quiet murmur spread across the cabin. Several passengers exchanged uncertain looks, unsure whether they were witnessing a simple seating mistake or something far more uncomfortable. The white passenger standing in the aisle checked his watch impatiently but never once looked directly at Jordan. Instead, he focused entirely on the lead flight attendant, confident that the situation would soon be resolved in his favor. Jordan unfolded his boarding pass and held it where she could easily read it. "Would you please verify my reservation before asking me to leave?" The request was polite, reasonable, and impossible to misunderstand. Still, she did not examine the document. "Sir, delaying boarding is unfair to everyone else. Please cooperate." Jordan nodded slightly. Verifying the facts usually takes less time than correcting a mistake. His voice never became louder than an ordinary conversation, yet his words carried enough weight that several nearby passengers quietly looked toward the boarding pass in his hand. A younger flight attendant paused while assisting another traveler and glanced toward the exchange with visible curiosity. The captain, still greeting passengers near the cockpit entrance, briefly looked into the cabin before returning to his checklist, unaware that a routine boarding process was beginning to unravel. Jordan had anticipated many possibilities before boarding this flight, but not because he expected poor treatment. For months, confidential customer feedback had arrived at his office describing incidents that were consistently dismissed as misunderstandings despite remarkably similar patterns. Rather than reviewing another carefully edited report from a conference room hundreds of miles away, he had chosen to travel alone without announcing his arrival to anyone connected with the airline. No assistant walked beside him. No executive security team cleared a path through the terminal. No employee had been warned that an important visitor was on board. Today he wanted one thing and one thing only. He wanted to experience the airline exactly as every ordinary passenger experienced it. The lead flight attendant crossed her arms and took one step closer. "This is my final request, sir." Jordan calmly met her eyes. "Then my final question remains exactly the same. Has my reservation changed?" For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Around them, the first-class cabin fell completely silent, and without realizing it, every person watching had become a witness to a decision that would soon reach far beyond a single seat on a single flight. Jordan Whitmore did not move. He simply looked down at the boarding pass resting in his hand before raising his eyes once again. "I would be glad to cooperate," he said evenly, "if someone can first confirm that my reservation has actually changed." The lead flight attendant folded her arms with growing impatience. "Sir, we have already explained the situation." Jordan answered without the slightest hint of frustration. "You have explained a decision. I am asking about the reservation." The distinction lingered in the air long enough for several nearby passengers to notice it. The elderly woman across the aisle quietly closed the novel she had been reading. A businessman near the window removed his glasses and watched with growing curiosity. The white passenger waiting in the aisle shifted his expensive suitcase slightly closer, clearly expecting the conversation to end in his favor. Before anyone spoke again, a younger flight attendant approached after noticing the unusual delay. "Is there a problem?" she asked. The lead flight attendant responded immediately. "We are relocating this passenger." Jordan politely held out his boarding pass. "Would you mind checking whether my seat assignment has changed?" The younger flight attendant accepted the document without hesitation and scanned the barcode using her company device. She waited while the screen refreshed, then looked at it once more to be certain. "Seat 3 Alpha," she read quietly. "Confirmed." She refreshed the reservation a second time. The same information appeared again. Passenger name. Flight number. Boarding group. Seat 3 Alpha. She looked toward the lead flight attendant with a puzzled expression. "Everything appears correct." The lead flight attendant glanced briefly at the screen but did not study it carefully. "Run it again," she replied. The younger attendant entered the confirmation number manually instead of relying on the automatic scan. Once again, the result remained exactly the same. "There are no seating changes," she said. Jordan thanked her with a small nod. "I appreciate you checking the facts." The lead flight attendant remained unconvinced. "There must be another issue." Jordan calmly asked, "What issue would that be?" No answer came immediately. Around the cabin, quiet conversations began spreading from one row to the next. Several passengers who had originally assumed Jordan was sitting in the wrong seat now looked noticeably less certain. The retired airline captain seated near the bulkhead observed the exchange carefully before speaking in a calm, experienced voice. "Reservation systems are usually quite reliable. If the manifest confirms the assignment, company policy normally follows the manifest." His words were not confrontational. They were simply factual. The younger flight attendant nodded almost instinctively. Earlier that morning, Jordan had walked through the airport exactly like every other traveler. He had checked a single carry-on bag, purchased coffee from a busy terminal cafe, waited patiently at the gate, and boarded with his assigned group. He had intentionally avoided every courtesy usually extended to executives visiting partner organizations. Only 3 people inside his own company knew where he actually was. His executive assistant believed he was attending financial meetings in another city. His leadership team expected him to spend the day reviewing quarterly reports through secure video conferences. Jordan preferred it that way because anonymous customer complaints had reached his office for months, each describing situations where verified reservations somehow became secondary to personal assumptions. Internal summaries repeatedly described those complaints as isolated misunderstandings. Jordan had decided that if meaningful answers existed, they would never be found inside a conference room. They would be found exactly where ordinary passengers experienced them. Standing beside seat 3 Alpha, the younger flight attendant quietly looked at the digital manifest one final time before raising her eyes toward the lead flight attendant. "I believe Mr. Whitmore is seated exactly where the system assigned him." For the first time since boarding began, uncertainty appeared across the lead flight attendant's face, yet instead of accepting the verified information, she slowly reached for the cabin phone and requested that a station supervisor come aboard immediately. The station supervisor stepped onto the aircraft carrying a company tablet connected directly to the airline reservation system. Unlike everyone else, he did not begin with assumptions or explanations. He accepted Jordan Whitmore's boarding pass, entered the confirmation number manually, and waited while the secure database synchronized with the live passenger manifest. The cabin remained unusually quiet. Even passengers still boarding sensed that something far more serious than an ordinary seating disagreement was unfolding. After several seconds, the supervisor looked carefully at the screen before comparing it with the information displayed on his handheld scanner. Every record matched perfectly. Passenger name. Flight number. Boarding group. Seat 3 Alpha. There were no duplicate reservations, no operational upgrades, no emergency equipment changes, and no maintenance restrictions affecting the seat. He looked toward the lead flight attendant and spoke clearly enough for those nearby to hear. Mr. Whitmore is assigned to Seat 3 Alpha. The reservation is valid. The younger flight attendant quietly lowered her tablet, relieved that another employee had reached exactly the same conclusion. The retired airline captain offered a slight nod, while the elderly woman across the aisle folded her hands together with visible relief. Jordan remained seated exactly where he had been from the beginning, his calm expression unchanged. "Thank you for verifying the reservation," he said respectfully. The white passenger waiting in the aisle shifted uncomfortably before asking, "Is there another first-class seat available?" The supervisor checked the seating chart once more. "There are no remaining first-class seats." A long silence followed. Most people expected the discussion to end there, but instead the lead flight attendant took a slow breath and said, "I still believe it would be better if Mr. Whitmore voluntarily accepted another seat so we can avoid further delays." Several passengers immediately exchanged surprised glances. The supervisor looked at her with obvious confusion. "There is no operational reason requiring him to move," he replied. Jordan looked up calmly. "May I ask why I should give up the seat that every company system has confirmed belongs to me?" Once again, no direct answer came. The retired airline captain finally spoke. "Company procedures exist for moments exactly like this. Once the reservation is verified, the discussion should be finished." His voice carried decades of aviation experience rather than criticism. The younger flight attendant quietly agreed. "Everything I have checked supports Mr. Whitmore's reservation." Instead of reducing the tension, each verified fact seemed to make the atmosphere even heavier. The lead flight attendant appeared unwilling to reverse a decision she had already made. Jordan recognized the pattern immediately. Throughout his career, he had attended countless executive meetings where people continued defending an incorrect conclusion simply because admitting the mistake had become more uncomfortable than correcting it. Facts had stopped being the issue several minutes earlier. Pride had quietly taken their place. Outside the aircraft windows, baggage crews continued loading luggage while ground vehicles crossed the ramp beneath the bright afternoon sun. Inside the cabin, boarding had completely stopped. The station supervisor glanced toward the boarding door, then back at the lead flight attendant. "We need to resume boarding," he said. She hesitated for a brief moment before answering in a firm voice. "Then I am requesting that Mr. Whitmore step into the jet bridge while this matter receives additional review." The request immediately changed the mood throughout the cabin. The younger flight attendant looked down in disbelief. The retired captain slowly removed his glasses. The elderly woman quietly whispered, "But the facts have already been reviewed." Jordan stood without raising his voice, picked up his leather travel bag, and asked one final question before stepping into the aisle. "Am I leaving because the reservation is wrong, or because someone has chosen not to believe what the reservation says?" No one answered, and the silence that followed revealed far more than words ever could. Jordan Whitmore stepped quietly into the jet bridge with his leather travel bag resting at his side while the station supervisor followed a few feet behind, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had unfolded. Through the open aircraft door, the cabin remained unusually still. Boarding had stopped completely, and passengers continued watching through the doorway, unable to understand why a traveler with a confirmed reservation had been asked to leave. The younger flight attendant remained near the entrance, glancing repeatedly between the digital manifest on her tablet and the lead flight attendant, hoping someone would finally acknowledge what every system had already confirmed. Instead, the lead flight attendant maintained her composure and insisted that additional review was necessary before boarding could continue. Jordan stood calmly beside the large terminal windows overlooking the ramp, where baggage carts moved steadily beneath the afternoon sun and aircraft pushed back from neighboring gates according to schedule. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Outside, every operation followed precise procedures. Inside, facts had somehow become secondary to personal judgment. The station supervisor checked the reservation system one more time, then quietly said, "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that every record still confirms Seat 3 Alpha belongs to you. Jordan gave a small, appreciative nod. Thank you for continuing to verify the facts. Before either man spoke again, the retired airline captain walked out of the aircraft and approached them with measured confidence. I spent 36 years flying commercial aircraft, he said calmly. Once the manifest is verified, there is no operational justification for removing a passenger from an assigned seat without a documented reason. That is the standard every crew is trained to follow. The supervisor listened respectfully because he knew the captain was correct. Moments later, the elderly woman who had been seated across the aisle stepped into the jet bridge as well. Young man, she said to Jordan with genuine kindness, I have watched this entire situation from the beginning. You have remained respectful every single minute. I hope someone remembers that when this is finally over. Jordan smiled politely. Thank you, ma'am. I believe the truth usually finds its way to the surface if we give it enough time. Back inside the aircraft, several passengers quietly questioned why boarding had stopped when the reservation had already been confirmed. The white passenger who had expected the first-class seat no longer appeared confident. Instead, he stood silently near the entrance, avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone around him. Even he seemed to recognize that the situation had moved far beyond a simple seating dispute. The younger flight attendant approached the lead flight attendant one final time and spoke softly enough that only those closest could hear. I truly believe we should allow Mr. Whitmore to return to his assigned seat. Every verification has reached the same conclusion. The lead flight attendant answered without hesitation. The decision stands until further notice. Those words settled heavily over everyone within earshot. Jordan heard them clearly, yet his expression never changed. Deep inside, however, another memory quietly resurfaced. Many years earlier, when he was still a teenager, his father had once told him after experiencing unfair treatment during a family road trip, people will sometimes decide who you are before they ever ask your name. Never let their assumptions decide who you become. Jordan had carried those words through every stage of his life, from his first internship to the executive office he now occupied. They had taught him that dignity was never proven by raising a voice. It was proven by remaining steady when others abandoned fairness. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, removed his phone, unlocked the screen, and looked briefly at a single contact that almost no one outside his professional circle would recognize. After one quiet breath, he pressed the call button, knowing that the next 6 minutes would change far more than anyone standing at gate 21 could possibly imagine. Jordan Whitmore held the phone to his ear for only a few seconds before the call connected. Jordan, the voice answered immediately. I was expecting your update later this afternoon. Jordan looked through the jet bridge window toward the aircraft and spoke with the same calm tone he had maintained since boarding. I need to activate Executive Review Protocol 7. The line became completely silent. Are you certain? The voice finally asked. I am, Jordan replied. Every reservation system has confirmed my assigned seat, yet I have been removed from the aircraft while those facts continue to be ignored. I would like the standard review process to begin exactly as written. Understood, the voice answered. No exceptions? No exceptions, Jordan said. Follow the agreement exactly as it exists. The call ended less than a minute after it had begun. Jordan slipped the phone back into his blazer pocket and quietly waited. He did not make another call. He did not approach the crew. He did not raise his voice. His responsibility was complete. Everything that followed would now be handled by procedures established years earlier. Inside a secure operations center nearly 1,000 miles away, a compliance officer received an automated notification marked Executive Review Protocol 7. Within seconds, the system verified the request using encrypted credentials before forwarding alerts to corporate compliance, partner relations, executive risk management, and the office of the chief executive officer at the airline. No one reading the notification knew the identity of the passenger involved. The protocol intentionally concealed that information during the initial review to ensure complete neutrality. The alert simply stated that a verified executive representative from a strategic partner had reported a potential customer treatment violation requiring immediate operational assessment. At the airport, nothing appeared to have changed. The lead flight attendant remained convinced that her decision would ultimately be supported. The station supervisor checked his watch, increasingly aware that departure time was approaching. The younger flight attendant quietly reviewed the reservation history one more time, hoping she had overlooked something that could explain the situation. She found nothing. Every entry showed exactly the same assignment from the moment the ticket had been issued. The retired airline captain remained in the jet bridge instead of returning to his seat. Years of experience had taught him that unusual delays often revealed much larger issues beneath the surface. He watched Jordan with growing respect. Most travelers placed under this kind of pressure would have argued, demanded names, or threatened complaints. Jordan had done none of those things. His confidence came from somewhere much deeper than emotion. A few feet away, the elderly woman smiled gently. "You seem remarkably patient," she said. Jordan returned the smile. "Patience is easier when you trust the truth." Less than 3 minutes after the call ended, the station supervisor's company phone vibrated unexpectedly. He glanced at the screen and immediately frowned. An internal operations notice instructed him not to close the aircraft door until further direction from corporate headquarters. Before he could process that message, the lead flight attendant's company tablet displayed a priority notification requesting that all customer interaction records related to the current boarding process be preserved without alteration pending immediate executive review. Her expression changed for the first time since the disagreement began. She looked at the supervisor, who silently showed her the message on his own device. Neither of them spoke. Around them, employees continued preparing the aircraft as though everything were normal, but an invisible process had already begun moving through departments far beyond the airport. Without anyone at Gate 21 fully understanding why, decisions were now being made inside executive offices hundreds of miles away, and the next few minutes would determine careers, corporate relationships, and the true cost of ignoring facts that had been visible from the very beginning. Inside the airline headquarters, Executive Review Protocol 7 moved through the corporate system exactly as it had been designed years earlier. Every notification carried the same instruction. Preserve all operational records. Suspend discretionary decisions related to the incident. Notify executive leadership immediately. Within minutes, senior managers from customer experience, corporate compliance, legal affairs, human resources, and flight operations joined an emergency conference call. The chief executive officer entered last, expecting another routine operational issue until the compliance director summarized the facts that had already been verified. Confirmed passenger with a valid first-class reservation removed from his assigned seat after multiple successful reservation validations. Operational justification has not been identified. The chief executive officer frowned. Who initiated the executive review? The compliance director glanced at the secure authorization screen before answering. The request originated from an executive representative covered under our Strategic Partnership Oversight Agreement. Silence settled across the conference line. That agreement was not activated for ordinary customer complaints. It existed only for executive partners responsible for evaluating long-term service standards and contractual compliance. Has the representative identified himself? The chief executive officer asked. Not through the standard report, the compliance director replied. The protocol intentionally withheld the identity until initial verification was complete. While the executive meeting continued hundreds of miles away, another secure notification reached the office responsible for managing strategic corporate partnerships. A senior partnership director opened the encrypted file, reviewed the authorization code, and immediately recognized the executive credential attached to the request. His expression changed instantly. Without wasting another second, he picked up the direct phone reserved exclusively for communication with the chief executive officer. Less than 1 minute later, the conference call stopped as the chief executive officer answered the incoming line. After listening for only a few moments, he slowly leaned back in his chair. "Are you completely certain?" he asked. "100%, the partnership director replied. "The passenger involved is Jordan Whitmore, founder and chief executive officer of Whitmore Strategic Holdings. His company is our largest technology integration partner, and under the oversight agreement he personally serves as the executive authorized to initiate independent service compliance reviews." No one spoke after hearing those words. Every executive in the room understood exactly what they meant. Jordan had not identified himself before boarding. He had not requested special treatment. He had not reminded anyone of his position. Instead, he had allowed every decision to unfold naturally until the available facts could no longer be disputed. Back at Gate 21, the station supervisor received another priority message directing him to maintain the aircraft at the gate pending immediate executive contact. Before he could respond, the lead flight attendant's company tablet displayed a new instruction requiring her to report directly to airport management upon completion of the current operational review. She read the message twice before quietly lowering the device. For the first time since the encounter began, uncertainty replaced confidence. The younger flight attendant noticed the change but remained silent. The retired airline captain watched carefully from the jet bridge, sensing that the situation had reached an important turning point. Jordan stood exactly where he had been throughout the delay, looking calmly through the terminal windows as another aircraft lifted into the afternoon sky. He showed no satisfaction, no frustration, and no sign that he had expected any different outcome. He had trusted the process from the beginning because he believed that fairness did not depend on recognition. It depended on whether an organization possessed the courage to follow its own standards when no one thought they were being tested. The station supervisor's phone rang before he had time to respond to the growing number of corporate notifications filling his screen. He answered immediately. "This is Gate 21. The voice on the other end spoke with calm authority. "This is the office of the Chief Executive Officer. Please listen carefully. Effective immediately, boarding will remain suspended until executive leadership arrives. Preserve all electronic records, communication logs, and customer interaction documentation related to this flight." The supervisor straightened instinctively. "Understood." The call continued. "Also, inform the lead flight attendant that she is being relieved from active customer service duties pending an immediate administrative review. Another crew member will assume responsibility for the cabin." The supervisor looked toward the aircraft entrance in disbelief before quietly acknowledging the instruction. "Yes, sir." A second airport manager arrived moments later carrying a sealed company tablet that required executive authorization before opening. After verifying his credentials, he reviewed the instructions and walked directly toward the lead flight attendant. She noticed his serious expression immediately. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The manager answered professionally, never raising his voice. "Effective immediately, you are being relieved from your current assignment while corporate compliance completes an executive review. Please surrender your company tablet and accompany me to the operations office." Her eyes widened. There must be some mistake. The manager remained respectful. "This is not a disciplinary conclusion. This is an administrative action required under company policy while the review is conducted." Around them, the younger flight attendant stood completely still, trying to understand how a routine boarding process had transformed into an executive-level investigation. The retired airline captain quietly removed his hat as the manager passed, recognizing from experience that only the most serious procedural concerns triggered this level of response before an aircraft even departed. Inside the first-class cabin, passengers exchanged stunned looks as another senior crew member stepped aboard to assume responsibility for the flight. No announcement explained the details, but everyone could see that authority had shifted. The white passenger who had expected Jordan's seat slowly lowered his gaze, suddenly understanding that the situation had never been about a simple seating adjustment. Meanwhile, another secure vehicle stopped outside the terminal entrance. Two senior airline executives walked quickly through the concourse toward Gate 21 after receiving direct instructions from corporate headquarters. As they approached the jet bridge, one of them quietly asked the station supervisor, "Where is Mr. Jordan Whitmore?" The supervisor pointed toward the windows where Jordan remained standing with his leather travel bag beside him, calmly watching aircraft taxi across the airfield. Neither executive had ever met him in person, yet both recognized his photograph from executive partnership briefings. They exchanged a brief glance before walking toward him. "Mr. Whitmore," the senior executive said respectfully, extending his hand, "I am sincerely sorry for the delay and for everything that has occurred today. We have now confirmed your identity as the founder and chief executive officer of Whitmore Strategic Holdings, and we understand that you are the executive representative authorized under our strategic partnership agreement." Jordan accepted the handshake politely but answered with quiet sincerity. "My identity is not the important part." The executive paused. Jordan continued, "Every employee who verified the reservation already knew the facts long before anyone knew my name. The real question is why those facts were not enough." Neither executive could offer an immediate answer. They understood that the most difficult conversations would not take place in the terminal but later, inside boardrooms where policies, leadership decisions, and organizational culture would all come under careful examination. At that moment, everyone standing at Gate 21 realized that the true issue had never been about who Jordan Whitmore was. It had always been about how an ordinary passenger had been treated before anyone believed he mattered. Jordan Whitmore listened quietly as the senior executive finished speaking, then gave a slight nod before answering with the same calm composure that had defined every moment of the afternoon. "I appreciate you coming personally," he said. "My only request is that every decision from this point forward follows your established policies and nothing more." The executive understood immediately. Jordan was not asking for favors, special treatment, or public recognition. He was asking the airline to apply the same standards that should have protected every passenger long before anyone discovered who he was. Within minutes, Human Resources joined the executive review through a secure conference call. Every available piece of evidence was assembled in chronological order. Boarding records confirmed Jordan had entered the aircraft legally with a valid first-class boarding pass. Digital reservation logs showed that Seat 3 Alpha had never been reassigned. Scanner history demonstrated that the younger flight attendant and the station supervisor had both independently verified the reservation multiple times. Security cameras captured Jordan remaining respectful throughout every interaction while repeatedly asking the same simple question about whether his reservation had actually changed. Audio records from internal operational devices confirmed there had been no documented safety concern, no equipment issue, and no operational necessity requiring him to leave the aircraft. The investigation became increasingly straightforward because every objective record supported the same conclusion. Less than 30 minutes after Executive Review Protocol 7 had been activated, the Human Resources Director delivered the findings to the Chief Executive Officer. The investigation has identified repeated failures to follow established customer service procedures after reservation verification was completed. The employee continued enforcing an unsupported decision despite multiple confirmations from authorized personnel. The documented conduct does not meet company standards. The Chief Executive Officer closed the report slowly before asking a single question. "Does Human Resources have a recommendation?" The answer came without hesitation. "Yes. Based on the documented evidence, we recommend termination of employment in accordance with company policy." Approval was granted immediately. Back at the airport operations office, the lead flight attendant sat quietly across from two Human Resources representatives and the airport operations manager. The conversation remained respectful, professional, and carefully documented. After reviewing the investigation findings, the Human Resources representative spoke gently but clearly. "Following a complete review of the reservation records, operational procedures, witness statements, and company policies, your employment with the airline is being terminated effective today." The room remained silent for several moments. No one celebrated the decision. No one spoke with anger. It was simply the formal conclusion reached after every available fact had been examined. Outside the office, the younger flight attendant lowered her eyes, saddened that the situation had reached such an outcome but understanding why accountability mattered. The retired airline captain quietly thanked the station supervisor for allowing the review process to proceed without interference. The elderly woman who had witnessed the entire incident simply whispered, "Sometimes the truth takes longer than it should, but I am grateful it finally arrived." Meanwhile, Jordan remained in the terminal speaking privately with the chief executive officer. "I want to make one thing absolutely clear," Jordan said. "I never asked for anyone to lose a job." The chief executive officer nodded. "We know. This decision was made by our Human Resources Department after reviewing the evidence. It reflects our policies, not your request." Jordan looked briefly toward the aircraft waiting at the gate before answering softly, "Then I hope today becomes more than a personnel decision. I hope it becomes a lesson that every verified fact deserves the same respect regardless of the passenger holding the boarding pass." The chief executive officer quietly agreed because, after everything that had unfolded that afternoon, there was no honest way to disagree. Jordan Whitmore walked back toward the aircraft beside the chief executive officer, but he requested one thing before boarding resumed. "Please do not make any announcement about who I am," he said quietly. "The passengers have already seen everything that matters." The chief executive officer nodded with genuine respect. "We will honor that request." A few moments later, the boarding door opened once again, and the station supervisor stepped inside the first-class cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We appreciate your understanding during an operational review. Boarding will now continue." His statement was brief, professional, and intentionally avoided unnecessary details. Jordan entered the aircraft carrying the same leather travel bag he had held from the beginning of the afternoon. Nothing about his appearance had changed, yet everything around him had. The younger flight attendant greeted him with a sincere smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Whitmore." Jordan returned the smile warmly. "Thank you." She stepped aside, allowing him to continue toward seat 3 Alpha. As he reached his row, the elderly woman looked up with kind eyes and softly said, "I am glad you came back." Jordan inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am. I am glad the facts came back too." The retired airline captain stood for a moment before extending his hand. Jordan accepted it without hesitation. "You handled yourself with remarkable dignity," the captain said. "Many people will remember that longer than anything else that happened today." Jordan answered with quiet humility. "I appreciate your willingness to speak when the facts deserved a voice." Nearby passengers smiled politely as he settled once again into the window seat that had been assigned to him from the very beginning. No applause filled the cabin. No dramatic celebration followed. Instead, there was something far more meaningful. There was understanding. Several passengers who had watched the events unfold returned to their own thoughts with a new awareness that appearances often reveal very little about the people sitting beside them. A few minutes later, the aircraft door finally closed, and the captain welcomed everyone aboard before preparing for departure. Outside the window, the runway stretched toward the horizon beneath the golden afternoon light. Jordan watched another aircraft rise into the sky and remembered his father's words once more. People would sometimes decide who he was before learning his name, but their assumptions would never define his character. Over the following weeks, the airline introduced additional customer service training focused on unbiased decision-making, procedural accountability, and the importance of relying on verified information rather than personal assumptions. Executive Review Protocol 7 also received new safeguards requiring immediate escalation whenever confirmed reservation data conflicted with customer treatment decisions. The changes were never described as being created for one important executive. They were presented as improvements designed to protect every traveler equally. Jordan considered that the most meaningful outcome of all. Long after the flight had landed and the headlines had faded, he reflected on the afternoon with quiet gratitude. Not because his title had eventually been recognized, and not because an employee had faced the consequences of violating company policy, but because an organization had ultimately chosen to correct its own mistake instead of defending it. As the aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky, Jordan looked out across the clouds and smiled faintly, knowing that genuine respect should never arrive only after power is revealed. The strongest measure of character is how we treat someone when we believe they are simply another ordinary person, because dignity does not begin with a title, wealth, or influence. It begins the moment we choose fairness before judgment and truth before assumption.